Featured in front of you is a pile of garbage, sprouting wings and flying. That's right, Fitbit. It's up 15 extra percent today. What's going on? On the week, Fitbit is up 66%. What is going on with this guy right here? Fitbit, of course, this is a company that was, I don't want to say dead in the water, but let's say the most stagnant company of all time. That's inaccurate, but they're very stagnant. There was no growth here in this stock. And guess what? They found some growth. Starts off earlier in the week. Fitbit jumps on reports of acquisition talks. Okay. So Fitbit shares have halted after an 18.6% jump. Reports that Google is in talks of acquiring Fitbit. Look at that. Interesting. But guess what? That's right. It's coming to fruition. So, Fitbit is going to be acquired by Google at $7.35 per share, which is a $2.1 billion valuation for the company. That's interesting. That is purchasing every share outstanding at this dollar amount. It's an important thing to note when companies make acquisitions. They purchase at a certain share amount or share price, and depending on that, that's obviously how you get this total valuation, because they're going to be purchasing every share at this value here, every public share, and that's how they get ownership of the company. So one thing to note too, obviously, if we're talking about just the general art of acquiring companies, so obviously the share price rose just due to the fact that people were thinking, well, okay, we're going to go ahead and, someone's going to buy it. That brings up share value. Obviously, people are excited about an acquisition. They're going to buy more into the stock because usually companies are going to pay a premium for purchasing that stock relative to what price it is. They're going to pay more per share than what it currently is, typically. That's typically how it goes, and that's what happens. And that's why these shares were halted, so you weren't able to trade them. Basically because this is a set-in-stone deal, $7.35 per share. What does that mean for shareholders? If we're talking about acquisitions for shareholders, there are one of two things that can happen here. So obviously with this purchase, $7.35 a share, Google is purchasing your share, whatever shares you have of Fitbit here. Google's acquiring those shares. So you don't just lose the rights to them. They have an option of either providing you with the cash from that trade, which if you're a Fitbit shareholder with any value per share under that $7 amount, which if you bought any time in the last 2 years, you'd be fine. You'd be making a lot of money there. You can make a lot of money based off this valuation. Nearly double the price of the stock at the that it was a month ago. That's pretty exciting. Other than that, Google can also choose to issue their own shares out to you as payment for them. So they can, or depending on value, give you partial shares of their company to repay you for the shares they just purchased of Fitbit. Because now it's the same company, so really it's just shares of the same company trading a little bit differently. Typically, companies are going to go with a cash option where they're just going to pay you out for those shares. But again, sometimes companies do offer shares in result. So then we talk about why in the world Google is doing this. It's pretty big for them to get into the wearable space. It just makes sense. It's actually a very fast growing segment for Apple as well. They've been growing wearables quite a bit. It's pretty well where we're headed as a future. People are going to be tracking everything from heart rate, steps. All these things that they can track. They can track anything from these, body temperature. Whatever it might be that you need. So that way we can have emergency response. There's so much potential for these wearables and what they can do for you in the future that it makes sense that Google wants to get in the game to compete with Apple, who is dominating the field. Apple's doing a good job of dominating. Obviously, there are other companies like Garmin's out there as well. Garmin has a couple wearables that they provide, Fitbit, and then Apple. We're really your main competitors in that market. So now Google will join the fray as they acquire Fitbit. It makes sense for them. So what exactly is Google getting? We'll get into that in just 1 second. What is Google acquiring? We'll look at Fitbit. It is important to note that also Facebook was also talking about purchasing Fitbit. Was only willing to offer what Google was willing to pay. So obviously, Fitbit leadership decided to go with Google, the offer from Google, as opposed to Facebook's offer. Which again, Facebook's trying to get everywhere. So I think overall it's fine. Facebook's getting into so many fields, they don't necessarily have to go into every field, or they could partner up with Garmin as listed here. I mean, there's a chance. I mean, if Facebook really wants to get into the field, which I think they will. I mean, I've told you they're going to be one of the largest tech companies in the world come 5 years. They already are, but I mean, they probably will be the largest come 5 years from now. So if you just consider that, they might team up with Garmin and produce a Fitbit type wearable of their own. So as far as what Fitbit carries, obviously they'll know them for their Fitbit Versa. This is their newest little wearable they have here. Very well known. Obviously good sleep tracking on it. I mean, they can do everything. One thing to note here, though, would be Alexa is built in with this. Amazon Alexa is built in with Versas now. So my guess is that's going to obviously be changing to Google Assistant. How that process is going to look, I don't know. I don't know how much that's necessarily going to cost Google to push through to fix that. I'm just going to 100% guarantee Google's not going to be in the field, in the market for, advertising for Amazon Alexa. So they will be switching to Google Assistant. Again, one or the other. It's perfectly fine. I don't own a Fitbit, so I don't care too much between the two. I do own a Google Home myself, so I'm familiar with Google Assistant, as well as, I have a Galaxy phone, so I have Google Assistant on that as well. So I'm not too familiar with Amazon Alexa, but I know a lot of people really enjoy having that assistance, and they think it's a little bit, I've seen some people that say it's a more robust artificial intelligence than Google Assistant is. We'll see how it goes. I'm interested to see what happens there, how quickly that transition comes. Other than the Versa, though, they also carry, as you can see here, another one of their most popular ones is the Charge 3. It's more of that traditional Fitbit style. So the Versa is kind of like more of a watch face, smartwatch look to it. A lot more ability to do a little bit more on there. The Charge 3 is a little bit more of a traditional Fitbit type, where it's just one pretty well thin strip. It still does all the essential functions, but it's just a little bit less bulky. You can do less on the face as well. A little bit smaller of a watch face, I guess. Whereas the Versa is more of a watch type. The Charge 3 is really just meant for just that wearable, athletic type design. They also carry Aria scales. That is one thing to mention too. Smart scales. That's a newer product for them. It is certainly interesting to look at, and they also carry accessories such as different bands for all these kinds of watches they provide too. So they sell different accessories for those watches, but obviously that the smart scales is a big field too. There's never going to come a time when people aren't going to be weighing themselves. It's just how it always is. So that's kind of what Google's acquiring there. I think this is a good purchase for them. It's good to get in the field to compete against Apple in that sense. As far as valuation on it, I'm going to tell you I think they overpaid. $2 billion for this company. I don't necessarily see the value there, but I mean, some people might. If we're just looking at this company, if we're looking at the financials of this company, which we're going to. It's not absurd, $2 billion in valuation, because trailing 12 months, over a year span, they're at $1.5 billion. $2.1 billion is not absurd, but it is a little bit high of a premium to pay, in my perspective. If we're looking historically, there's plenty of companies that do this. I think I'm pretty well done talking about just the Google and Facebook or Google and Fitbit acquisition. I wanted to go a little bit more into just general acquisition as well, just some other key ones that have happened and what's the result of them. So here's a Kraft Heinz merger, which is one of the biggest mergers, obviously, in history. So obviously this is pretty well 50-50 split between who owns what. Kraft and Heinz split shares. So in this sense, in this specific case, Kraft shareholders received cash payments of $16.50 per share, which was that acquisition amount, which is $10 billion value, fully funded by $10 million in new common equity contributed by Heinz shareholders. So it makes sense. How they're structuring here, obviously they mentioned they're structuring because obviously this is a big acquisition between two big companies if you think about it. So who's going to stay on what board of directors, what's that transition going to look like? They're maintaining Kraft's dividend. This is back in 2015. So this is just one of the acquisitions. There's been plenty. Another one I think is important too is Amazon's acquisition of Whole Foods. Again, one of the better acquisitions made by Amazon to get more into a physical retail state. And obviously Whole Foods is everything's overpriced. Let's not be incorrect here. But it makes sense. We're getting, I want to say, a lot more health conscious as a nation, and it's where we're looking at. We want to choose healthier options now. A lot of people do want to choose healthier options, and they're going to choose more sustainable options, and that's really what Whole Foods usually provides. So that's kind of the goal there. That was just a couple other historic acquisitions and the result of them. But again, most of these are going to be cash payments to the original shareholders. Just wanted to point that out a little bit. So that's all I really have to say about this Google Fitbit acquisition. We'll see when it closes. But if you owned Fitbit shares prior to this week, I feel very proud for you. You did a good job. You hung out there. That would have been the only reason why I personally would have owned Fitbit shares, was the hope of an acquisition. I didn't look at it for capital appreciation, but I did think there was a chance they would get acquired, and I didn't necessarily think it would be by Google, but I think it's pretty exciting that they did it. So something to look at.